the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now here's your host for this week, Micah Marshall.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast, and we are so excited that you're with us. This is Student Ministry Conversations, and we're having conversations with youth pastors and youth leaders from all over the place talking youth ministry stuff. And if this is your first time listening to us, I want to welcome you, and I want to say, hey, go over to our website, studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our previous episodes. We have hundreds of episodes back there, because the goal of this is to inspire and encourage so that you can hear things that you can actually apply in your ministry. And today we're going to be talking a little bit more on what transitional seasons look like, from a healthy season to in an unhealthy way, and then a healthy season, back and forth, all these things. But I'm excited to probably have who would be personally my favorite guest that I have had on here. I've had a lot of guests, but I am honored to be sitting down today with Billy Spriggs. Billy Spriggs and I have been friends since we were 13, 14?
15, I would say, I think
15.
14 or
Yeah,
15.
it's been a long time.
So it's been a very long time.
Yeah, man. Spriggs, thank you so much for being with us. Everyone knows him as Billy. I know him as Spriggs. But Billy, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're serving, how long you've been in YouthMin, and then we're going to jump into this whole story that I want people to hear about your journey.
Yeah, so currently in Las Vegas, Nevada right now. Been here for just over 2 years as the next gen pastors alongside my wife, and we helped launch a church here in Vegas called Vita Church. Before that, we were in Phoenix, Arizona for just over 5 years on staff at a church there called Hillsong. And then before that, we did youth ministry and did a little mission work overseas. And so we've been involved in youth ministry pretty much our whole adult lives. And me and my wife Ashley together for the last 13 years. So it's been a while, but that's where we feel called. That's what God wants us to do right now. And so we said yes, and we're still going.
Yeah, and listen, I would just straight up tell you, not because he's one of my close friends, but Billy and Ashley have a powerful youth ministry that they're running, and you heard them right, out of Las Vegas. Like, I can't imagine if you were like, hey, where will Spriggs end up? I would have never picked that up on a map, that you would be in Las Vegas doing youth ministry.
It's not somewhere I would have picked either.
That's it. We're both from Pittsburgh. So we're both from Pennsylvania. And we've lived here, and we've been part of, ministries in this area. But what I want to do is I want to take our listeners, our viewers, on a journey for you and Ashley. And so because you guys heard him right when he threw that in there, that he had served overseas for a while, and then they landed in Arizona and served at Hillsong. I'm going to just probably go out on a limb and say a lot of our viewers are very familiar with the Hillsong story.
I would assume most people are familiar.
Yeah, been in the news. Been in the news for the last several years. Say the last 5 years, there's been there. So tell us, how did you get from doing the missional work overseas to getting to Hillsong, and kind of walk me through how the ministry was there when you guys arrived.
Yeah. So we did a thing called the World Race, and it's through an organization called Adventures in Missions. And so we did that 2015, 2016. We were overseas for 7 months. And that in itself was a great experience, but an unhealthy environment when it came to the leadership for it. And so we ended that season very hurt, very confused on what God wanted us to do next. And we ended up back in Ohio with Ashley's family, not knowing what to do. A few months after being home, got pregnant with our first child. And, we have our first child living in Ohio in the winter. It's miserable. And so we were like, we need something else. We need to get out of Ohio. There's just nothing here. And so we had friends that were part of our wedding ceremony that lived in Phoenix, Arizona. So they invited us to come, stay with them for a few months, just to figure out life. We got there, we planted with them for a few months, and we just fell in love with Phoenix. Within the first month, got plugged in to Hillsong, which was the church they were attending. And then a month after that, started volunteering in the youth ministry. And it was just an uphill trajectory from there. Like within that semester, like we were basically running one of the campuses as volunteer youth directors. shortly after that, Ivor was brought on staff. And it was going great. We loved everything we were doing. We loved the community that we were building, the students that were there. Like, we knew that's where God needed us to be in that moment.
Yeah, and that's what's crazy is that, like, many of the other podcasts that we've recorded, and even myself that we've talked about, is like being in a situation where, like, you realize, hey, I'm serving God, but I'm in an unhealthy situation with leadership. Being able to recognize that and say, okay, this is not good. This is not
Yeah.
good for me. This is not good for my wife. This is not good for my marriage. And so, like, it's always very humbling to go back to somewhere like Ohio or Pennsylvania after you have served in ministry for that purpose. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. But you landed in Arizona, in Arizona, Phoenix, a great place to do ministry, serving with Hillsong. And for those of you that don't
Yep.
know, can you give maybe people who don't know what Hillsong is? Can you give them a little history of what Hillsong is, what they're about, how they kind of emerged, and just kind of like I don't Cliff Notes version of what Hillsong is
Yeah.
about?
So Hillsong was founded by Brian Houston. It's an Australian-based church that founded out of the Assemblies of God in Australia. And so whenever he first founded it, he had a big dream for it. Was a very dynamic preacher, but he was young, and so didn't know where it was going. Years later, they have this huge ministry with their worship. They have Hillsong Worship, Hillsong United, Young and Free, which is their youth band, and they are taking the world by storm with their music, and eventually their speakers that they have on staff throughout all over the world. And so obviously Brian Houston's was the lead pastor. You know people like Carl Lentz. There's people that just were dynamic speakers that kind of put Hillsong on the map throughout the years. And if you don't know, obviously a lot has happened in the past few years with Hillsong. If you haven't paid attention to the news, with different scandals between those two guys specifically, Brian Houston and Carl Lentz. There's been other smaller stuff in other areas where there's been some issues with Hillsong leadership, and so it's been a wild ride going from knowing what Hillsong was to what we experienced in Phoenix with Hillsong. It it wasn't what we had planned or signed up for at all.
Yeah, so major, like, this is major because I don't think we've had a podcast yet where we talked about the Hillsong situation where we've done this. And for those of you that don't know, like, a lot of the songs that we sang in the late 90s, early 2000s in church, in worship, were Hillsong songs.
Yeah.
And what I want to say, though, to this is, like, just because these things have happened in the situations of leadership, it doesn't take away from the power of a lot of those songs. It doesn't take away from the power of us glorifying and worshiping God. Because there's a lot of people that are like, oh, Hillsong, right in the trash, everything. And part of being in leadership is, that God uses you in magnificent ways to bring forth things that can honor him. And then sometimes when you get in the way and you yourself are there, that doesn't glorify God, and that is trash, and that needs to be thrown away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're at Hillsong, you're there, it's starting. It's the honeymoon stage, right? Like, things are going really, really great and well for you. When did the
Yep.
signs, or when did the red flags, or when did things start to kind of unravel a little bit for you?
Yeah. And so, just to put a little context to it, so our location in Phoenix of Hillsong was the first location of Hillsong that was not a church plant. So typically, Hillsong will go into a city and they'll bring their own leadership and plant a church. But Phoenix was the very first location that a church that was already established became Hillsong. So we stepped into this thinking, okay, we have this global church that kind of is our umbrella that's going to kind of direct us, kind of steer us in the right direction. But probably about, right after COVID hit in 2020, we started to see that wasn't the case. And the issues that we were experiencing on a local leadership level in Phoenix weren't changing. They weren't being corrected by global Hillsong. And so, apart from what was happening globally with the Hillsong struggles, we had our own local struggles that we were dealing with. And so, it was just a perfect storm when it came to crashing down everything around us, what we knew. I think you're muted.
Yes.
There we
For
go.
those of you, I'm
All right.
muted because my dog is here and he's a psychopath, and I just don't want him making his appearance yet. But
Yeah.
the one thing that I think is that Carl Lentz and him pastoring in New York, he has this explosion of ministry. God is using him in wonderful ways. Celebrities,
Yeah.
athletes, people from all over the world are coming to his church and they're experiencing God in a powerful way. And
Yeah.
so I want to be very careful because I don't ever want to talk bad about people's failures because we all have them. But what we can look at
Exactly.
is we can look at people's failures and say, okay, how do we align ourselves to not make those same mistakes? How do we become self-aware of these things that happen? I never was a regular listener of Carl Lentz. I would also probably say, to be honest, I wasn't a regular listener of Brian Houston as well. They weren't guys I
Yeah.
just really listened to. It just wasn't they weren't in my world or in my peripheral. So, or they were more in my peripheral than like, I know who they are, but I don't really follow their ministry. And so,
Yeah.
you have Carl Lentz doing this thing, amazing thing. But then all of a sudden, within a few weeks, you have all of this controversy that begins to come out of Hillsong, New York.
Yeah.
Rumors, headlines, this, that. But then all of a sudden, the domino, which I would say the first domino falls. And
Yep.
that is the multiple affairs, that is the multiple relationships, emotional or physical, with women. That is the lack of accountability. There
Yeah.
is all these things that begin to have this domino effect. Next thing you know, I think it was Netflix. Was it Netflix or
It
Hulu?
was
Somebody,
no, I think it was BBC.
BBC, somebody goes and begins to do these documentaries. I don't
Yeah.
know where or how this all started, where the world began to hear rumblings. And let's just be real. We know that the culture that we live in, they celebrate failure, especially within the Christian culture. There's a
Yep.
terminology called failure porn, where people celebrate and are embracing, and they are happy to see, especially Christian leaders, fall. And so
Yeah.
all these documentaries start rolling out, and they're all over. And and I got wind of it. I watched the documentary. My heart broke, if I could say that, because
Yeah.
of ministry. My heart broke, and it was really something that I'm like, oh man, this is just like another black eye on Christianity as a whole. Um,
Yeah.
and I knew you were there. I knew you and Ashley were there serving. And I think as soon as I watched the documentary, I was like, hey, what's going on? And not only did I do that with you, but Spriggs, you remember my friend Brittany Claire and Blake? They were the Barners.
Yep.
Now they're Claire. Like they went and served at the actual school that they talk about in the
Yeah.
documentary. I reached out to her and her husband David. Hey, is this true? What is going on? Like, I don't want to believe a bunch of lies, but they were true. They were
Yeah.
true. So this documentary explodes. What begins to happen eternally inside of the church that you're at? How does this residual impact of all these documentaries? It's all over the news. I mean, like international news outlets are talking about this. Let me reverse this. How do you feel personally? How are you and Ashley dealing with this on a personal level? Then what are the residual impact that it makes on the church there? Because, not like you just said, you had all this going on in the big house, right? But then also over
Yep.
here, there's all these other internal struggles that are happening. What's going on with you guys at this point?
Yeah. And so whenever we first found out about everything that was starting to happen, it was not necessarily like a surreal moment because we weren't super connected with Carl and the New York team and that location there. Like we'd have him come out and speak a few times at our location in Phoenix, but it wasn't like we had like regular interaction or conversation with him. And so the personal impact wasn't as big to us as it may have been to the church itself, because having that name Hillsong, you think of a few people, whenever it was in its heyday, whenever it had, that global impact, you thought of Brian and you thought of Carl, you thought of the worship, you thought of these few things that came along with that Hillsong name. And so to see basically the poster boy of Hillsong, the one leading the charge of the way that he, speaks, leads, to be able to, or to fall into a trap and to fall into sin, it shakes up people's kind of theology a little bit, and it shakes up like, okay, well then who can I believe or who can I follow when it comes to leaders within a church? And so we had some conversations within our staff, within, the room about like, what kind of impact, how we lead people through this, knowing that they look up to Carl, they look up to the way that he led himself, the way that he spoke, how well he articulated and communicated to people. And so it was difficult in that aspect to have to pastor people through the issue, but personally, it didn't really hit home for us. We didn't have that personal connection with him. So
Yeah. Well, and it's hard though, because what happens is reputation, right? Like
yeah,
reputation. Hillsong, very respected, very looked to. I would even say probably at that point, if not leading, like in the top three leading ministries worldwide, right?
yeah,
Worldwide. There wasn't
yeah,
really any country that was like Christian that loved Jesus that you would go to that did not know who Hillsong was. So it's
right,
making an impact, because they also, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, they had campuses not only in the United States but all over the world. Um,
yeah. I forget the exact number, but they were in, I believe, close to 20 different
yeah,
countries.
and so that's huge. That's a big impact,
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so you have the reputation of Hillsong, what it stands for, what it is, and then you have like this whole thing just hit the fan. Things go
yeah,
crazy, and I think you just said it so well. Pastoring the people through that.
yeah,
Because like we do it all the time, man. Like we put ministries or speakers or preachers, we put them up on this pedestal, and
exactly.
we believe that nothing can knock them off there. We believe that they're living a life of integrity of character, that they're that they are just living the best that they can. And then what happens when they fall off that pedestal? It rocks our world, because we're naturally drawn to the people that are leading, and when the people fall, it gives us a viewpoint that like of the ministry in all of its aspect. um,
Yeah,
and so you said pastoring the people through this, because the people are
hmm,
what, they're hurt, they're confused, they're dealing with
yep,
because what do we want to do? We want to defend, right? We want to defend against
yeah,
accusation. We want to say like, oh, no, 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 this can't be true, this shouldn't be true. Like we want to be able to consistently do that in the best way possible. But the truth is the truth.
right.
So okay, so this all goes down, you're pastoring people through it. How long until the snowball effect of impact from this on a national scale hits the church?
Uh, I would say it wasn't until the um, the fallout and the accusations that came about with Brian Houston, where it really caught, like, it really snowballed, and there was a big impact on the church. Like I said, people looked up to Carl, but there wasn't a lot of as deep connection with him as there was with Brian, who founded the church. He's the lead global senior pastor of the church. And so whenever it came down to the things that were coming out about him that happened after Carl, then there's a lot of things that are being talked about with accountability within the church. Who has, who knows what's being ignored. And so the integrity of the name Hillsong is now being put into question because of now multiple things are coming out about multiple leaders within the church that probably could have been handled a completely different way. And so that snowballed. It just kept getting bigger and bigger, to the point where our church in Phoenix eventually split from Hillsong. And just before or right as we did, that was also when um, Hillsong Kansas City, Hillsong Atlanta, all the churches that had been brought on after Hillsong Phoenix, they decided that they no longer wanted to associate with Hillsong either. And so
So,
you only,
so Spriggs,
yeah,
did some of those churches close completely, or did they disaffiliate?
they disaffiliated. So there was one campus in Hillsong, Dallas that closed completely. And I think that was after the closer to the Carl
Okay.
situation, that there was a lot of those leaders came from New York, and so there was a lot of issues from their leadership there. But the ones Phoenix, Kansas City, and Atlanta, they just disassociated and went back to what they were called before Hillsong.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because I think that people need to understand that like not every Hillsong church just closed up shop and was done.
No. Yeah.
A
No.
lot of times in these type of situations, you disaffiliate to something else. Maybe you call yourself something else. You do something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you and Ashley are navigating this with the people of your church, people of your community, people that love
Yep.
Hillsong, but yet there's also the internal struggle of what you both are dealing with,
Yeah.
under what would be the leadership of that church. So as you're
Yep.
navigating this chaos with what's happening on an international level, and as you guys are processing this with your people, your leaders, because I'm sure you're talking to other leaders from other churches, from other branches, you're all trying to figure this out. When
Yep.
did the journey for you to exit this and say, okay, like we need to move on? When did that really begin to emerge and part into your hearts that like, hey, we need to move on to something else?
Yeah. So I would say probably in like somewhere in the middle, maybe summer, fall of 2021, we started kind of questioning, where God wants us to be. And so we had some internal struggles with not necessarily Hillsong, but the local church that we were part of that was Hillsong. Um, Thinking that global Hillsong would kind of correct some of these issues, maybe come in and give some guidance towards some of these things that not just we were experiencing, but other staff members were experiencing. Once we realized at the time that the scandal with Brian was coming out, that's when our church disassociated from Hillsong, and we just knew that there wasn't going to be a change in the way that that church was operating, and it we basically felt like in that season we were on an island, even though we were part of probably one of the biggest churches on the globe. It was very isolating. There wasn't a lot of collaboration with other churches. There wasn't a lot of time to um, talk shop with other youth pastors, but it was very internal, and a lot of times the internal issues that you were having you couldn't talk about because it was with a
Yeah,
direct
yeah. Who are
upline.
you going to talk to? Who are you
um,
going to talk to
exactly.
when you're serving under leadership? You can't
Yeah.
go talk to your leadership about that.
Yeah. And so we brought what we could to our leadership to try and fix the issues that we were having with other people. um, Nothing really was fixed, and so we gave it some more time. And then once the stuff about stuff about Brian came out, and our church split from Hillsong, that's when we were like, okay, this is our time. This is our chance. We know that nothing's going to change, and not our issues, the things that we're struggling with, aren't going to be addressed, and we're just going to feel stuck. And so now is our chance to get out. And so that's what we did. We took a 9-week sabbatical. Took a road trip all around the U.S. Saw a bunch of different people. Came and saw you and
Yeah,
your wife in Pennsylvania,
yeah.
and like we saw people that we did ministry with, years ago when we were overseas, that live across the U.S. We saw people that, we went to school with in high school and college, and so we got to kind of experience, everything that we needed to outside of ministry, and kind of get that peace and reground ourselves to where we needed to be. We ended our road trip in Las Vegas, and our friends that were there, they were part of our Las Vegas location of Hillsong that was brought on from their church, was absorbed in, became Hillsong Las Vegas. But shortly before we ended our term there, they had kind of been pushed out from that, but they still felt called to Las Vegas, so they were in the process of healing themselves and still felt called to be a part of a church and plant a church in Las Vegas. And we knew, but we hesitated because earthly desire. We didn't want to move to Las Vegas. We have a family. It's not an ideal place. But we did our road trip, ended our road trip in Vegas, and we knew that's the leadership that we needed to be under. And then, so even through all that negative and the issues that we were dealing with, we were still able to create that friendship in ministry with these friends, and it turned into the opportunity to plant a church with them and be on staff with them, which is the blessing that we got out of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that, man, we could unpack so much that you just said, because there's so much, I think, important, prolific points
Yeah.
that you made. Realizing, number one, that, like, okay, this is an unhealthy place. We need to get out of here. And
Yeah.
so taking 9 weeks off of ministry, when you've been in ministry for years,
Yep.
that alone is like trying to wrap your mind around, where we all know, and people that are listening and watching, we all know that ministry is a 24-hour, 7 days a week,
Absolutely.
365 days a year calling.
Especially student
Yeah.
ministry.
Yeah.
It's
It
constant.
is. It's all the time. To go from,
Yep.
so I want everyone to understand, to go from the busyness of that life schedule to 9 weeks of we're just going to travel the road. Like,
Yep.
mentally, emotionally, physically, the difference that is going to play into you. Because I'm sure it probably took you guys a while to decompress, to
Yeah.
unwind. Like, I think that's the
Yep.
thing about ministry. People are always like, "Oh yeah, go take a week vacation." Listen, it takes more than a week to decompress from ministry. If you're doing it right, if
Yep.
you're doing it correctly, you need more than a week to decompress.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But knowing your heart, because you and Ashley, you guys came to visit Bethany and I, and
Yep.
even for me, I was coming out of a season of depression, anxiety. I shared that with you when you guys were there, what it meant to me.
Yep.
It was like a healing to have you guys there for me, to be able
Yeah.
to be like, man, I've come out of I was coming out of a hard season myself. And then for you guys to just speak life to us, and then us be able to speak life back to you, and just to encourage one another, like that's what it's all about. Because we're in
Yeah.
it together. We do this together.
Exactly.
So you navigate this whole 9 weeks. You're decompressing from all of the ministry, but then you also have this other aspect of processing what has happened. And 9 weeks is a long time to process those things.
Yeah.
The good, the bad, the ugly, the right, the wrong. I've been in ministry long enough to realize now that some leaders you learn under of what to do, some leaders you learn what not to do.
Yeah.
And so part of this leadership principle is that you can learn from bad leaders. You can learn from toxic leaders of how you
Yeah.
don't lead and how you don't treat people and what you don't say to people. But so you're in this journey trying to figure it out. You land in Las Vegas out of everywhere in the United States. We
Right.
don't have to explain to people how crazy Las Vegas is. I'm sure they are familiar.
Yep.
Literally Sin City, right? Sin
Yeah.
City. You land there, you're with your friends, you're talking ministry. God lays this on your heart to start this. At this point, you and Ashley have multiple kids.
We have 3 kids.
three-
At that time, they're 1, 3, and 5.
Yes. So you're going to raise a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Yep. Exactly.
Starting and pioneering this church. Let me ask you, coming out of what you came out of, was there hesitancy was there more of an alertness to, okay, what are we really doing here? Because you came out of a season that was rough. Or was it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Walk me through that.
Yeah. I mean, whenever you go through, hurt or pain, you remember that what brought upon that pain or what brought upon that hurt, and what you kind of do when you experience it, you pick up on these indicators or triggers so that you can recognize when it's about to happen again. And so, just like with pain receptors in our bodies, we recognize when something is hurting us so that we can stop. And so whenever you feel that emotional pain or emotional struggle, you pick up on things, you remember things on how, okay, this hurt me. The way this was handled was not the way that it wasn't healthy. And so you go into a next season with that in mind, And so you're constantly looking for those red flags. You're constantly looking for those things. Okay, this is what I experienced before and I don't want to experience again. So I'm going to make sure that those type of situations aren't what's ahead of me. And so what allowed us to feel confident eventually and say yes to Las Vegas was all the red flags that we had experienced, all the hurt and pain that we'd experienced in the previous season. It was flipped upside down, and it was opposite of what we were now walking into. Like, just to give a quick example, in the 5+ years that we were in Phoenix, we never had a one-on-one sit down with our lead pastors, like dinner at their house, and that was one of our issues. Like, it was so disconnected in the way that it was led. But the people that our friends that we planted this church with in Las Vegas, they're some of our best friends, and we do life and ministry together. And that was one of the things that we wanted, we valued. Like, if you're going to do ministry, you have to be doing it with people that you enjoy doing it with, that you can get along with, that you can support each other with, that you're doing life with, even through the good and the bad. And so when we didn't have that support through good, bad, whatever it may be, we knew that's what we needed in the next season.
I think it's very important to realize that, it's okay to be hesitant. It's okay to look for the triggers, look for the red flags as you pursue the call of God and as you move from season to season. I don't think that's a bad thing to be like, okay, I'm going to be on high alert here to make sure that I don't put myself and my family in an unhealthy position within ministry, because it happens a lot. I think it happens more than what we really like to talk about, and more than that is verbalized. And so it's one of those things, but you get to a point where that this is what God has for you. So you've been there now 2 years, right? Like you've been,
just over 2 years.
Just over 2 years.
Our church celebrated 2 years last month in September, and we officially moved to Las Vegas like 2 weeks after we launched the church. So we were commuting from Phoenix. So we landed back in Phoenix because we had our rental house that we were staying at there. And within those weeks that we were saying yes to moving to Las Vegas, we commuted every weekend.
How long was that commute?
It was like a 4.5 to 5 hour drive every time.
Wow.
And so and that's with kids that are 1, 3, and 5. So we drive there, on a Thursday or Friday, stay through the weekend, and drive back to Phoenix on a Monday. And it was a lot, but we knew it was the sacrifice we had to make in order for us to be where we needed to be.
Yeah. And I think that any good thing comes with sacrifice.
Absolutely.
And things are seasonal, right? Like, you knew it was a season. You knew, like, hey, I'm going to navigate this for a season, and then in a couple of months we'll be there, we'll be thriving. Awesome. Well, I hope that any of the viewers or listeners are just listening to the story. Again, this wasn't to bash Hillsong or Carl Lentz or Brian Houston. Bring awareness to unhealthy church culture, realizing how to navigate through that, and to talk a little bit more about that. So do me a favor, Spriggs, talk a little bit about what you and Ashley are currently doing. Talk about Firebrand, which I love, like, as soon as I saw the name, I was like, oh, Firebrand, because that's close to our heart.
I know. It's crazy.
We go back with that. But talk about all the great stuff that you guys provide. Talk about your ministry, but also do me a favor, throw out the socials, websites, anything, if people want to contact you, hear more about this, or hear more about your ministry.
Yeah, just before I dive, just to go tie into what you just said, we reached out to Braided by Fire because it's still happening in Brownsville. It's become it's become a yearly conference that they do. So we reached out to them, like, hey, we'd love to partner with you. This is how our story progressed. And so it's crazy because that's where our relationship started.
Yeah, that's where we met. We hung out, that's where we met on that van ride, or on that bus ride down there.
Bus ride, in March 2003. And so, so we reached out to them. But what's crazy, in the 2 years we've been in Vegas, like, saying yes to what God wants us to do, the amount of doors that He's opened up for us. We were approached with this show, the Firebrand show, which is hosted by Christian Television Network. And so we are about to finish filming for season 2 here soon. But that's a nationally aired show through TV. So it's on Dish Network, DirecTV, through local television, but it's also available through their CTN app. It's on YouTube. But we love what we do with that. Like it gives a chance to talk about, topics that the next generation is asking about, things that they might be getting answers from other places that we want to kind of point them in the right direction with biblical truth and kind of give them that solid foundation and put their heart on fire for the right thing. And so we've been doing Firebrand now for the last, I want to say just over a year and a half now.
What I love,
we are
well, let me
part.
say this. What I
Yeah,
love about it is, number one, I love about you and Ashley are just yourselves. Like, you guys are like, hey,
yeah,
this is us. Like, you guys have great banter back and forth, but also great insight into the Lord. Your wife is a powerhouse.
yeah,
She is a powerhouse, like, woman of God. She preaches. I love her. I love what she's doing. But what
yeah,
I also love, what you guys bring students on your podcast,
yeah,
and you talk to
yeah,
students about these things, and you talk to leaders, and you talk to pastors, and you talk to youth pastors. You guys talk to
yep.
everybody.
I mean, it's a show. I mean, we want to make sure that it's not so one dimensional, and we're only focused on trying to reach a few people. We want to reach as many people as we can with this, whether it's students, leaders, pastors, parents, whatever it looks like. So for our next season, I think season 3, we're going to be a lot more student focused in our guests and allow them to bring their ideas and their topics and their perspective to the show, and so change it up a little bit. But yeah, like you said, Ashley, she's a dynamic speaker. She actually just got added to a preaching team.
Yeah. With my boy
And
Peter
so
Reeves, I saw that. I was like,
Peter
"Go ahead,
Reeves,
Peter.
yep.
Get you the best of the best."
Listen, just the kind, not necessarily like toot Peter's horn, but like he got a word from God when we were at a youth pastor refresher, November of 2023. No, 20, yeah, November 23. No, November 2022. Yeah. Um, you know what? I'm sorry. It was 23. He's basically said that we were under the right leadership that we needed to be under. God's going to start, turning our negative ministry attention into a positive ministry. And he had no idea that we were part of Hillsong before. So like he had no idea what we just walked through, no idea the leadership that we were under before, that we are under now. And then he gave this third word that our church in Vegas would acquire $22 million by the end of the year. And so we're like,
Let's go.
we're believing, tied all together. 3 days later, our lead pastor gets a call from a church in California asking to have an interview for him to and his wife to take over as lead pastors of that church as well. So kind of like a merge. He said, no, I'm not your guy. They were persistent and called back again. And throughout conversations, months of conversations, we finally said yes. August of this year, we took over that church in Lancaster, California, not Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And so we took over that church. But what's crazy, as we were, figuring out what this looked like, we asked, like, what is this church worth? And so we asked the board, like, hey, how much is the church property, everything they own? What is the value of the church? $22 million.
Just like that.
And we're like, God is working, God is moving through this. And so we're beyond blessed with all the things that we get to be a part of, all the things that, like I said, with Ashley joining Peter Reeves' preaching team, the Firebrand show that we have, all of it was birthed out of our yes to God out of a rough season.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times you have a rough season with God and you tend to pull back. You tend not to say yes as much. And so just encouragement before we end, like whatever it is you're facing, whatever it is that, you just came out of, continue to trust God, continue to lean in and say yes to what he's calling you to. And you'll see the fruit from it.
Amen.
But socials, Firebrand Show, you can find on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. It's all at the Firebrand Show. One word, very simple. We kept it uniform across there. If you want to find me on Instagram, it's just Billy Spriggs. You can reach out to me there as well. And our church in Vegas is called Vita Church. And then our church in California is called City Church. If you're ever in the area and want a church to come visit, we would love to have you.
All right. Well, hey, you guys heard it all. I hope you were encouraged. I hope that God really spoke to your heart through this. Spriggs, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate you, dude.
You're
you
welcome.
know I love you. I'm always in your corner.
Love you.
Make it to Vegas soon. We're working on it. On it. We will be there.
We'll get you out here.
But hey, listen, all of your viewers, all the ones that have been faithful, make sure you follow, subscribe, continue to look out for us on studentministryconversations.org. Everything that you need is found on that site. We will also be posting this on our socials as well. We look forward to hearing all the positive impact that this podcast can make through your life and hopefully inspire you. But on to the next one. We look forward for you to tune in and have a great day, and God bless.
God bless you.